2022 was a bit of a weird year for games, as the continued effects of the pandemic caused countless delays that left long dry spells between game releases. But looking back on everything that did come out last year, I was shocked by just how many high quality games we did get. In fact, 2022 saw the release of several games that are no doubt going to go down as some of my favourite video games of all time, which actually made it pretty difficult to figure out the order I'd put these games into, especially once I got down to my top 10. Before we dive into the list, I want to give a few quick honourable mentions. Sonic Frontiers, Need for Speed Unbound, and Tactics Ogre Reborn are all games that I think had the potential to earn a spot on this list, but I just haven't played enough of them to feel fully comfortable placing them on the list. An SNES era-inspired JRPG, Chained Echoes, looks extremely up my alley, but I haven't had a chance to check it out yet. Now, with that out of the way, let's get right into my top 25 games of 2022. Kicking off the list at number 25 is LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga, which despite being overly bloated with side content and bogged down by repetitious puzzles, is still undeniably the most ambitious LEGO game ever made. This is a game that pulls off the impressive feat of allowing you to play through the stories of all 9 films in the Skywalker saga, while also letting you explore countless iconic planets from across the Star Wars galaxy as over 380 playable characters. If you're a Star Wars fan, this game provides so much to nerd out about, as it showcases every corner of each of the 3 Star Wars trilogies through a fun and completely non-cynical lens, which is very refreshing when we're so used to being surrounded by nothing but the perennial discourse that surrounds Star Wars Online. The Skywalker Saga's gameplay also features vastly better combat and vehicle sections than any prior LEGO Star Wars game, which makes it a joy to relive all of the most memorable set pieces of the 9 films in LEGO form, and that alone justifies a playthrough of the Skywalker Saga if you have even a passing interest in Star Wars. At number 24, we have Eilden Chronicle Rising, a prequel game that was developed as a stretch goal as part of Eilden Chronicle 100 Heroes Kickstarter campaign. While Eilden Chronicle Rising isn't the deepest game in the world mechanically, it's still a fun little action RPG with a charming cast of characters, awesome character design, a cozy hub town in the form of New Nevaeh, and a clever new take on handling an RPG party system that sees each character mapped to one of the face buttons, allowing you to string together combos of all the characters' unique abilities without ever having to switch between them. Above all else, Rising achieved its main objective of getting me more excited than ever to play Eilden Chronicle 100 Heroes when it releases later this year. Number 23 is Nobody Saves the World. I've been a big fan of Drinkbox Studios since the PS3 and Vita days, when they were putting out games like Tales from Space: Mutant Blobs Attack. And while I definitely like some of their prior games like Severed and Guacamelee more than Nobody Saves the World, it's still a good game thanks to its witty writing and unique shape-shifting gameplay gimmick. While the titular Nobody is in and of himself completely powerless, at the start of the game he stumbles upon a magical wand that allows him to shapeshift into a myriad of different forms, each with their own unique abilities. Where Nobody Saves the World starts getting truly fun is when you start mixing and mashing the different classes' abilities with each other, which allows you to do things like transform into a horse who kicks people to death, then cause their bodies to rise again and fight alongside you as zombies. At number 22, we have another standout indie, Rollerdrome. Rollerdrome essentially feels like if you crossed a Tony Hawk game with an arena shooter, then gave it a stylish cel-shaded art style to tie everything together, and it's every bit as fun as it sounds. Rollerdrome is a game that forces you to always be thinking one step ahead, deciding what order you need to take out enemies so you don't get overwhelmed, while also making sure you're pulling off as many tricks as possible as you rollerblade your way to your next target. Because performing tricks isn't only how you bolster your score, it's also how you get more ammunition for your weapons. Complete with a laundry list of challenges to complete and a leaderboard that'll draw you back over and over again, Rollerdrome is a perfect example of one of those games where you keep telling yourself, just one more run, until you look up at the clock and realise it's suddenly 3 AM. Speaking of games that are stupidly addictive, at number 21 we have Vampire Survivors, a simplistic but endlessly challenging and replayable roguelike that was made by a solo developer. The genius of Vampire Survivors lies in its simplicity. This is a game that you can literally play one-handed, as all you're really doing is moving the left analog stick to avoid enemies as your character automatically attacks. But the depth comes from carefully choosing which power-ups to take to make your character as powerful as possible, as quickly as possible, so you don't get overwhelmed by the never-ending hordes of enemies descending upon you. At number 20 on the list, we have Metal Hellsinger. I'm a metalhead, I've always had a soft spot for rhythm games, and my favourite shooter is Doom, so it should come as no surprise that I loved Metal Hellsinger, a game where you fight your way through hell, mowing down armies of demons in rhythm with blaring metal music. The way more elements of the music get added as your score multiplier goes up is a very clever way of letting you know how you're doing without you having to constantly take your eyes off the action to monitor your score. And when you hit a 16 times multiplier and the vocals come roaring in, it feels absolutely incredible. Of course, a game like this is only as good as the music featured in it, and fortunately for Metal Hellsinger, its soundtrack is its greatest strength. With a lineup of guest musicians including members of legendary metal bands like System of a Down, Trivium, and Ginger, Metal Hellsinger is a strong contender for Soundtrack of the Year. At number 19 is Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin, a game that serves as a stark reminder that 9 times out of 10, gameplay is the most important aspect of a game, and that when you're having fun playing a game, it's shocking just how easily you can overlook its flaws. Stranger of Paradise is a game with a nonsensical story, unlikable characters, abysmal dialogue, and dated visuals. Yet I still thoroughly enjoyed it, because its robust combat mechanics that make Stranger of Paradise play like a cross between a character action game and a Souls game are excellent. And the way Stranger of Paradise plays with Final Fantasy's job system by letting you switch between almost 30 different job classes on the fly to mix up your weapons and abilities kept the gameplay consistently engaging as I cleaned up every last side mission in pursuit of the Platinum Trophy. Number 18 is Pokémon Legends Arceus. I ummed and ahed about whether I'd put this or Scarlet on my list, as I think both are very good games that are doing interesting new things with the Pokémon formula. But ultimately, in its current state, Scarlet's performance issues are just too significant for me to give it a spot on the list. Pokémon Legends Arceus was the most exciting and ambitious Pokémon game released in well over a decade. Arceus put the series' focus squarely back on the gotta catch 'em all tagline, as it's a game all about catching Pokémon to research them, and it introduces so many great gameplay changes that I hope to see carried over to future Pokémon games. Chiefly, the ability to just aim and throw a Pokeball in the wild, allowing you to catch a Pokemon without a battle, and the way that Arceus lets you physically move your character around while your Pokemon are battling to check out fights from different angles, a change that makes Pokemon battles feel more dynamic than they ever have before. The Hisui region is also one of the strongest settings in a Pokemon game thus far, thanks to its diverse array of environmental biomes, which are packed with interesting new regional variants of classic Pokemon. Number 17 on the list is Bayonetta 3. Polarizing ending aside, Bayonetta 3 is a fantastic character action game featuring the fast and frenetic combat that Platinum games are known for, and the Bayonetta series' most over-the-top and ridiculous set pieces yet, which is really saying something. This game also notably saw Jennifer Hale take over as the voice of Bayonetta, after Helena Taylor, who provided Bayonetta's voice in the first 2 games, departed the role, and the drama that ensued following that could be a video all unto itself. Needless to say, Bayonetta has become a very iconic character for gamers, and Jennifer Hale had some pretty big shoes to fill, but I think she absolutely killed it, and managed to give a performance that felt perfectly in line with what you'd expect out of Bayonetta. At number 16, it's Ghostwire Tokyo. It feels like the video game industry can often be pretty averse to taking risks. Understandably so, seeing as how much money is on the line in game development. But if you're sick of sequels and ready to experience something brand new in the open world genre, I cannot recommend Ghostwire Tokyo highly enough. With its spell-flinging combat, dark atmosphere, and creepy and memorable enemies, many of which are ripped straight out of Japanese folklore, Ghostwire Tokyo is one of the most refreshingly original AAA games I've played in years, and it's not getting anywhere near as much attention as it deserves. At number 15, it's a new take on a familiar IP, Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. This spin-off truly reinvigorated my love of the Borderlands series. I was a huge fan of Borderlands 1 and 2, and have so many fond memories of staying up all night with my friend, tearing our way through those games. But by the time we got to Borderlands the pre-sequel and Borderlands 3, I was starting to get a little fatigued with the series, and was beginning to question if I'd just outgrown Borderlands. But as it turns out, I just needed the series to do something a little different visually and narratively, while maintaining the addictive loot treadmill that kept me coming back to the first two Borderlands games over and over again. And that's exactly what Gearbox did with Wonderlands, a game that essentially took the premise of Borderlands 2's excellent DLC, Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon's Keep, and fleshed it out into a full game. Wonderland's blend of a Dungeons & Dragons inspired world and Borderlands' traditional looter shooter gameplay is delightfully absurd. There's an impressive amount of variety found in both the environments and enemies, and the writing found in Wonderlands is a huge step up from the frankly cringeworthy dialogue of Borderlands 3. Wonderlands also has a great cast, including comedic talent like Wanda Sykes, Andy Samberg, and Will Arnett, all of whom help Wonderland's jokes land more frequently than prior Borderlands games. At number 14, we have the devilishly addictive Cult of the Lamb. This is a game that completely got its hooks in me and didn't let go until I'd extracted every last shred of entertainment. Part Animal Crossing town builder, part dungeon crawler, Cult of the Lamb combines so many aspects of different games that I love. It was also one of 2022's most visually unique games, combining cutesy character design with some very dark imagery as you indoctrinate and sacrifice cult members to create the most robust and powerful cult possible to appease the demonic creature that saved your life. I'm also always happy to see an Aussie team have a major win, as the development scene here in Australia largely lives and dies by these indie studios. Cult of the Lamb would have easily cracked my top 10 of the year if it weren't for the performance issues I ran into in the latter half of my playthrough. At number 13, it's a game that I'd been looking forward to for a very long time, Stray. Stray was a game that caught my eye at the PS5 reveal event, and I always found it to be a show stealer at every subsequent event it popped up at. And once I finally got my hands on it, Stray was everything that I wanted it to be. While this is without a doubt a game that'll be most resonant for my fellow cat owners, I still think there's a lot to love in Stray for everybody, as Stray was one of the most atmospheric games I played this year. As I explored this dystopian world's towns that are populated only by robots long after the fall of humanity, I became completely enraptured by Stray's environmental storytelling, trying to scrounge for details and figure out what the hell happened to this world. The intriguing world building combined with the simplistic but fun puzzles and remarkable visuals that feature some of the most impressive environment design, animation work and lighting in a game last year make Stray one of the best indie games of 2022 and puts Blue 12 Studios on the map as one of the most promising new studios of the past decade. And now we cross the halfway point of the list with number 12, Marvel Snap. I've got to say, I never thought I'd see the day that a mobile game made my top 25 list, let alone earned a spot in the top half. Not because I hate mobile games or anything, but because I rarely play them, and when I do, they hardly ever hold my attention for more than a couple of hours. But Marvel Snap has me hopelessly addicted, and I've found myself jumping in every day since it came out. This immaculately designed card game that was created by former Hearthstone developers is the epitome of what a card game should be. Easy to learn, while still offering an endless amount of depth as you start exploring different decks and the way different cards can interact with one another. It really says something about the balance of this game that whenever I jump into matches, I see people with vastly different deck builds, all of which seem to be viable for getting wins, and with the average match taking only 3 minutes, it's easy to end up playing match after match of Marvel Snap. At number 11 is a remake of one of my favourite PSP games, Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion. I had two main takeaways when I played the original PSP version of Crisis Core back in the day. One was that Zack Fair is one of the most endearing Final Fantasy protagonists, and the other was that it had one of the most memorable video game endings ever. And 15 years later, I think both of these things are still 100% true in Crisis Core Reunion. Crisis Core's combat feels fantastic, and Tosei have done a remarkable job with the visual overhaul of this game. While there are ways that Crisis Core shows its age, namely its clunky dialogue, simplistic mission structure, and confined environments, its story and satisfying action RPG mechanics make Crisis Core an adventure that's still well and truly worth going on. Kicking off the top 10 is another remake, Live Alive. Live Alive has an almost legendary status as this square RPG from the SNES era that managed to develop a cult following despite never being released outside of Japan. In 2022, us Western players were finally given the chance to experience Live Alive in the form of a remake in Square Enix's gorgeous HD 2D art style. I was looking forward to experiencing this game purely because of the history behind it, but once I played it, it completely blew my expectations out of the water. Choosing to focus on a series of vignettes instead of one huge overarching story, Live Alive feels almost like playing through a series of miniature RPGs that are each a couple of hours long, with each of these vignettes taking you to a drastically different time period. You'll play as a caveman exploring a prehistoric landscape, a ninja in the Edo period of Japan sent to infiltrate a fortress to rescue a political prisoner, a cowboy defending a town from a gang of outlaws in the Old West, and a Shifu in Imperial China who's seeking disciples to pass his martial arts techniques onto before he dies. And that's just scratching the surface of the stories you'll experience in Live Alive. If you're a JRPG fan, I cannot recommend Live Alive enough, as it's one of the most unique games to ever grace the genre. At number 9, it's a gold star example of a licensed game done right. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge. Now that some time has passed since it was released, and I've had time to really marinate on it, I think I can comfortably say that Shredder's Revenge is my favourite beat 'em up ever. The beat 'em up genre is pretty hit or miss for me, and it's rare for one of these games to fully click with me, but Shredder's Revenge is a game that I just adored every aspect of. Its roster of 7 playable characters offer enough variety to incentivise repeat playthroughs, its immaculate pixel art makes it a delight to look at, and its soundtrack, which is comprised of a mix of classic chiptune and contemporary sounding music, is absolutely incredible, and even includes a new theme for Shredder from 2 of Wu-Tang's finest, Ghostface Killer and Raekwon the Chef. Battling Shredder as a Ghostface verse blared in the background was definitely one of the most hype gaming moments of 2022 for me. At number 8, it's a game that exudes charm, Kirby and the Forgotten Land. Until last year, I had never truly loved a Kirby game. There were Kirby games that I liked, but I always felt the series paled in comparison to other Nintendo franchises. However, that all changed when I played Kirby and the Forgotten Land. This game saw Kirby ditch his 2D platforming roots for a fully 3D adventure for the first time ever, and it was exactly the kind of innovation that this franchise needed. Kirby and the Forgotten Land takes Kirby's core ability to inhale enemies and absorb their powers to absurd new heights with the introduction of Mouthful Mode, an ability that lets Kirby inhale inanimate objects and take on their properties. This allows Kirby to zip around as a car, blast enemies with soda cans as a vending machine, or act as a glider by inhaling a fence. All these abilities give Kirby and the Forgotten Land a degree of variety that no prior Kirby game has had, which combined with the Forgotten Land's magnificent level design, surprisingly challenging secret levels, and wonderful art direction, make Kirby and the Forgotten Land not only my favourite Kirby game ever, but one of the Switch's very best games. At number 7, we have one of the most heartbreaking and riveting experiences of 2022, A Plague Tale Requiem, the follow-up to the surprise hit A Plague Tale Innocence. I played through both of these games this year, after Innocence had been sitting in my backlog forever, and I completely fell in love with this series. The bond between Amicia and her little brother Hugo is one of the most powerful relationships in gaming, and this game just further deepens it as Requiem sees a more desperate and ruthless Amicia escorting her brother across France in search for a cure for the macula, the blood trait that's slowly killing him. In Requiem, the stakes are higher and the swarms of rats that are spreading the plague are bigger and deadlier, and navigating this oppressive, plague-riddled world is more stressful than even Innocence was. As you skulk around the dimly lit environments, picking off the guards hunting Amicia and Hugo, either with well-timed headshots with Amicia's sling or crossbow, or by using the environment against them, pushing them into open flames and extinguishing the guards' torches so they get swarmed by rats, it's hard not to be completely consumed by a feeling of tension. Requiem also tackles some very heavy themes, some of which run parallel with one of my favourite games, The Last of Us Part 2, as Amicia comes to terms with her role as Hugo's protector, and deals with the toll committing acts of violence takes on a person. Requiem also deserves major props for just how well it sticks the landing. The last few chapters of this game are utterly relentless, right up until the game hits its gut-wrenching final moments that provide something that surprisingly few games actually do. A satisfying conclusion that provides a sense of closure to the story. At number 6, we have another sublime sequel, Horizon Forbidden West. Horizon Zero Dawn was an incredibly important game for Guerrilla Games. It elevated their public perception and proved that they were so much more than just the Killzone studio. Needless to say, Guerrilla needed to knock it out of the park with the follow-up, and that's exactly what they did with Horizon Forbidden West. Improving on the already rock-solid combat mechanics of its predecessor, the battles in Forbidden West are a spectacle to behold. Slowly dismantling the robotic monstrosities that stood in my way was some of the most fun I had playing a game all year. I also love the way that Forbidden West continues to further develop Aloy as a character, both through its overarching story and with its dialogue trees that let you shape Aloy's personality and create a version of the character that feels uniquely your own. Not to mention that Forbidden West might also be the best looking open world game of all time. In fact, I think Red Dead Redemption 2 is literally the only other game that could even give it a run for its money. The facial animation is remarkable, the designs of the gargantuan enemies are spectacular, and this is the kind of game that has so many beautiful vistas, it's almost impossible to not stop and open up photo mode every 5 minutes. So I'm certainly looking forward to jumping back into Forbidden West when the Burning Shores DLC drops later this year. Kicking off the top 5 is a remake of one of my favourite games of all time, The Last of Us Part 1. Whether you thought this remake was necessary or not, The Last of Us Part 1 is now the definitive way to experience one of the best games ever made. Almost 10 years later, The Last of Us continues to hold up remarkably well against the test of time. When I played through and platinumed The Last of Us Part 1 on PS5, it was probably the 5th or 6th time I'd played The Last of Us, with my most recent playthrough of The Last of Us Remastered being right before Part 2 was released. And yet I still find this game every bit as riveting as I did the first time I played it. Ellie and Joel are two of the best written and acted characters in video game history, and between Tess, Bill, Henry, Sam, Tommy, and of course Riley in the Left Behind DLC, The Last of Us still has one of the strongest supporting casts I've ever seen in not only a game, but in any piece of entertainment. And while I do think The Last of Us Part 2's gameplay is better, I'm always impressed by just how good this game feels to play. The weightiness of its combat and the visceral nature of its violence give fights in The Last of Us a degree of intensity that no other franchise can match. While The Last of Us was a gorgeous looking game, it was still a PS3 game, and as the years have gone on, the game was starting to show its age in certain areas. But now with this version that was rebuilt from the ground up for PS5, the game is once more looking utterly breathtaking. The character models, lighting, and environments have all been drastically improved, and the reworked facial animations allow the actors' performances to shine through in a whole new way, with far more of the little nuances of their performances being showcased now. With The Last of Us HBO show being right around the corner, which is sure to introduce the franchise to a whole new audience, I'm glad those people will be able to check out this remarkable looking version of the game that inspired it. At number 4, it's my biggest gaming surprise of 2022, Marvel's Midnight Suns. I was interested in Midnight Suns before its release, but I wasn't truly excited about it, because while I liked the XCOM games, I always eventually burnt out on them before rolling credits. I think largely because I struggled to get invested in their world and the generic feeling soldiers. But being a huge comic book nerd, swap those soldiers for a bunch of superheroes that I already have a pre-existing investment in, and all of a sudden, I'm all in. This is one of the best and most insanely ambitious strategy RPGs I've ever played. There's just so much to like about Midnight Suns. The card-based combat mechanics are superb, there's a huge hub area to explore, getting to form different squads of your favourite Marvel superheroes is a nerdy video game dream come true, the social elements that let you form bonds with each of the different heroes allows the game to provide great exposition and really flesh out this version of the Marvel universe, and Midnight Suns knows exactly when to introduce a new party member to always keep things exciting. Midnight Suns does a great job of playing with each of the characters' unique power sets and figures out the best ways to implement them into a turn-based strategy game. For example, you can have magic open portals across the map in front of hazards, then send enemies plummeting through them, while Spider-Man can web up the most dangerous enemy, giving you a moment to take out their minions. Midnight Suns also comes up with clever ways to mix up missions by throwing in additional objectives on the map, like disarming bombs and rescuing civilians, so you're not just endlessly fighting waves of bad guys. It was awesome to see such a different style of superhero game, seeing as more often than not, superhero games tend to be some kind of third-person action game. And don't get me wrong, I adore the Arkham series and Insomniac's Spider-Man games, but it's always great to see a completely different style of developer get a crack at exploring one of these universes. At number 3, it's a game that came out at the beginning of 2022 and hasn't left my mind since, Sifu. Sifu was one of the most rewarding games I played in 2022, thanks to its combat mechanics that are nothing short of sublime. There were stages of this game that when I first played them, I was unsure if I'd ever be able to beat them, but by the time I was done with Sifu, I could get through these stages without taking a single hit, because Sifu rewards you for your patience and perseverance. As you start to learn your enemy's attack patterns, become more comfortable with your moveset, and familiarise yourself with your surroundings through repeat attempts, you start to get into an almost rhythmic flow where you're stringing together combos and dodging attacks instinctively. This fighting game inspired combat brings something new to the roguelike genre, which is crucial if you want to stand out in a time when roguelikes are a dime a dozen. Sifu is also one of the most stylish games of 2022, thanks to its distinct art style, silky smooth animations, and memorable environments that use colour to excellent effect. The more I think about Sifu, the more it becomes clear that this isn't just one of my favourite games of 2022, but one of my favourite games of all time. So I guess it really says something about the calibre of games released in 2022 that there are still somehow 2 games above Sifu. As we come to the very tail end of the list, we have number 2, God of War Ragnarök. This has been my most anticipated PS5 game since its announcement, and I think it's fair to say that it more than lived up to my expectations. Ragnarok's storytelling is phenomenal. There's no other video game character who has grown and matured as much as Kratos has throughout his journey. Ragnarok's calm and reasonable Kratos, who cares only about ensuring his son's safety, is a far cry from the bloodthirsty Kratos of the original God of War games, who shouted every word and wanted nothing but revenge. Of course, Atreus also played a huge part in making the prior game the memorable experience that it was, and throughout the course of Ragnarök, I only grew to like him more, as Ragnarök gives us a slightly older and more independent Atreus trying to find his place in the world and figure out what role he's meant to play in Ragnarök. While at its core, Ragnarök is a story about Kratos and Atreus, that didn't stop Santa Monica from spending a significant amount of time fleshing out its entire supporting cast. Ragnarök has to juggle a significantly bigger cast than its 2018 predecessor, but it manages to do this flawlessly, ensuring that every new and returning character gets their moment. Ragnarök does an exceptional job of showing all of the Norse gods it presents, not as beings to be idolised, but as deeply flawed people with their own demons they're battling. It also does a great job of twisting their stories from Norse mythology to make them work within the world of God of War. The hulking Thor and unassuming but intimidating Odin are two of the most memorable enemies Kratos has ever had to face, and I love the way that Ragnarök provides Atreus with some contemporaries in the form of Angrboda and Thrud. Freya was one of the strongest parts of God of War 2018, and her story arc in Ragnarök elevates her to being one of my favourite fictional characters ever. This incredible cast of characters is wonderfully brought to life through both Santa Monica's impeccable writing talent and the spectacular cast, all of whom bring absolutely phenomenal performances to the table. And all of Ragnarök's biggest moments are further elevated by Bear McCreary's unbelievably great score. And somehow I've gotten this far without talking about God of War Ragnarök's extraordinary gameplay. Expanding on the already exceptional combat mechanics of 2018, Ragnarök has some of the most tightly designed combat I've ever experienced in a game. Alternating between the hefty blows of the Leviathan axe and the fast sweeping strikes of the Blades of Chaos feels amazing, and the extensive lineup of enemy types keeps combat feeling fresh throughout the course of this surprisingly huge adventure. In just about any other year, God of War Ragnarök would have easily been my game of the year, but in 2022, there was one game that bested it for me. And so we finally arrive at the end of the list with my favourite game of 2022, Elden Ring, which I'm sure is a surprise to nobody. Elden Ring is the kind of game that comes only a few times in a generation, a masterpiece of a game that will no doubt influence many games for years to come. With its fascinating lore, ginormous world that fills you with a genuine sense of wonder and curiosity, and its robust and satisfying combat that provides you with an almost unfathomable amount of weapons, which allows you to approach fights in an almost endless amount of ways, Elden Ring was a game that completely consumed me when it first came out. I was spending every free moment playing it, and when I wasn't playing Elden Ring, I was thinking about it. From Software have been the absolute kings of boss fights for over a decade in my eyes, and in Elden Ring they've really outdone themselves with a series of brutally challenging but always fair boss battles. Not only are these battles flawlessly designed and balanced, they're often remarkable visual spectacles, and because of this I know that I will always remember duking it out with bosses like Radahn and Melania. I've loved From Software since I played the first Dark Souls game, and I've played through every Soulsborne game they've developed, and after mulling it over, I can comfortably say that I think Elden Ring is the best game they've ever made, and one of the best gaming experiences I've ever had. Well, there you have it. That was my top 25 games of 2022. Overall, I'd say 2022 was a pretty good year for games, but what did you think of the gaming landscape in 2022? Let me know your game of the year in the comments below, and be sure to stay tuned for my next video where I'll be counting down my most anticipated games of 2023. As always, thank you for watching, and as this is my first video of 2023, Happy New Year, I hope it's a good one for all of you, and here's to another year of incredible games.